Hello, my friends. In this video, we will be taking a look at the autosomal DNA results, predicted phenotype traits, and the G25 results of a 12th century Ashkenazi Jew from Germany. I have previously covered Ashkenazi Jews from Germany from Erfurt, and what's interesting about these samples from Erfurt is that they are pre-pogrom era because there was a pogrom in the city which expulged all the Jews from the city into Eastern Europe. So the Jewish population of Erfurt actually went all the way to zero from a couple of thousands to zero after the 13th century. So these are the pre-pogrom Jews of Erfurt that I'm covering in my videos. But what is interesting specifically about this sample that I'm going to cover is that this sample has a lot of Northern European admixture, which is very different from the rest of the Jews I have covered previously. So there's essentially two clusters of Ashkenazi Jews from Erfurt, and one cluster is the Middle Eastern cluster, which clusters with populations of the Eastern Mediterranean, such as Greeks, Turkish people, and Cypriots. And another cluster is sort of the more Northern European shifted cluster, which cluster more so with Southern Italians, Albanians, maybe mainland Greeks, rather than populations of the Eastern Mediterranean like Cypriots and Turks. So there's a slight difference between these two clusters, basically, and this individual right here falls into the more Northern European shifted population of Ashkenazi Jews. So this individual has a little bit of European admixture, and it is very apparent. I was actually so surprised by looking at his results with the Davidsky G25 standard model, where he scores 34.7% Yamna Samara ancestry. This was so surprising for me to see because this is actually the majority component of ancestry. For this sample, Yamna is the majority component of ancestry for this Ashkenazi Jewish sample. So he's actually majority European. And that is completely unexpected for me to see for an Ashkenazi Jewish sample. Maybe it is the fault of the calculator, I'm not sure. Maybe, I don't know how to interpret this, to be honest, because there is also 9% 11 ppnb, which is like Natufian-like admixture. And he's also scoring, to be fair, he's only scoring 2% Western hunter-gatherer, which is very unusual and atypical for Europeans. Europeans typically would score much higher of this component, and he's also scoring stuff like Yoruba as well. So maybe this is due to overfitting. He's just scoring Yamna as a way to overfit for the Caucasian and West Asian shift that is present in the sample. I am not exactly sure why he is scoring let me zoom in, 35% Yamna in the sample for Davidsky G25 standard model, but nonetheless, the majority component he scores is Yamna at 35, nearly 35%, which is really, really absolutely impressive for an Ashkenazi Jewish sample. So essentially, the point I'm trying to drill into you with this intro is that this sample is extremely autosomally European. Now, if you look at the closest populations to this sample, it is still Mediterraneans. It's not like French people or Germans, right? It's still Greeks, and it's still Rumelia East. It's still Gagauz. So it's still like populations of Bulgaria and Greece and mainland Greeks, stuff like that. No, Macedonians show up here as well, I think. Turkish, it's still Balkan Turks and Albanians. So the closest populations to this sample are still populations of Southern Balkans. It is still not really Germans or French people, right? Even though the sample is heavily admixed in European admixture, this sample is still majority Mediterranean in ancestry. But if you look at the single admixture, you can see there is a presence of heavy European admixture, right? So compared to the Ashkenazi from Russia, for example, which are majority of the admixture of Ashkenazi from Russia falls into the Mediterranean cluster. Majority of these Ashkenazi from Russia, Ashkenazi from Belarus, Ashkenazi from Lithuania, Poland, they all cluster pretty much the same as the Middle Eastern cluster of these Jews from Erfurt. Like the same Jews that I've been covering in my previous videos from Erfurt, the Middle Eastern cluster, they cluster the same as the Ashkenazi from Russia, Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, and the rest. It is the European Jews from Erfurt that are the outliers, actually, because you can see they score Ashkenazi from Russia plus Albanian plus Yaroslavl plus something else. So it makes me wonder if in the 12th century in Erfurt there were these Jews who had all this admixture, all this Northern European and Albanian admixture, Where did this admixture go? Why don't Jews in Europe today have this admixture? It really makes me wonder what happened to this admixture in Ashkenazi Jews. Um, why do Jews today, why do pure Ashkenazim today not have this Northern European admixture that apparently some samples from Erfurt had? Or maybe I am misunderstanding things, because there's, to be fair, if you look at the samples from Erfurt, there's much more Middle Eastern samples than there are Northern European shifted samples. To be fair, in terms of the sample size, the size of the samples, there's much more Middle Eastern samples than Northern European ones. So maybe simply they dissolved into the Jewish population over time, and Jewish people do have these little bit of European admixture and Albanian and whatever and everything else. Maybe they do have this little bit of admixture that's foreign, but because it's such a small sample size, it ended up getting dissolved, and it's just a very tiny percentage now. But I'm not really sure how to interpret that, to be honest. Let's try to see 5 populations and distance column maybe 1. Let's try to see what we get there. So here is getting modeled as mostly Greek from East Macedonia and France, and Thrace, Ashkenazi from Russia, and Turkish from Rumelia. Let's try to remove all the Ashkenazim from the reference, and just to get a glimpse of how much Middle Eastern and European admixture this sample has. Just get rid of all the Ashkenazim from the reference, and let's try to run that now. So now it's getting modeled as mostly Greek from East Macedonia and France, Thrace, Turkish Rumeli, Maltese, Turkish German, and Italian. So it's getting modeled as mostly Balkan and a little bit East Mediterranean as well. So a mixture of Balkan and East Mediterranean is what this sample is mostly scoring. I think if I remove the distance column, it's going to be a little bit better, because it's kind of getting everything closer to each other. So okay, so now we're getting a better look at what it's scoring. It's a mixture of Serbian, Italian, Jew. So okay, Italian Jew is sort of serving as a proxy for the Ashkenazi or Sephardic like admixture in the sample. And Ashkenazim and Sephardic is pretty much the same in terms of autosomal admixture. There is like very, very little difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazim. And then there is Greek from East Macedonia and Thrace, which is Balkan. Then there is Roma, which Roma makes sense because this sample scores Shahari Sahtabron BA2, which is not Iranian Neolithic farmer. It's like a mixture of Iranian Neolithic farmer and Indus Valley. And Shore Mountain, which also makes sense because this sample scores Han, 2.5% Han. So this sample actually has a little bit of East Asian admixture as well, which is really interesting. So this sample has everything. It's got East Asian, it's got Natufian, it's got Neolithic farmer, it's got also Neolithic farmer, it's got Indus Valley, it's got Tafaralt, it's got even black. So this sample really has all kinds of admixture in it. Now let's go ahead and look at what this sample scores with my Nashakot tool. And by the way, for the YDNA is J1, very typical YDNA lineage for Ashkenazi Jews, and the mitochondrial lineage is K1A1B1A. Now let's look at the Nashakot calculator results and let's see what they look like. So for the eye color, looks like they most likely have green eyes or blue eyes with an amber center. So some kind of a light intermediate eye color between blue and pretty much hazel, and intermediate eye color between blue and hazel, kind of like the same eye color as what I have. So something that's light but not quite blue. They definitely don't have brown eyes or dark brown eyes. For hair color, looks like they scored dark blonde hair. Most likely hair color for them is dark blonde. Although light brown hair is also quite possible at 36%. And they definitely don't have black hair. And for skin color, they most likely have white skin tone. And they could have pale skin or olive skin as well, but most likely they have white skin tone. And for hair texture, they most likely have curly, wavy, or straight hair. They pretty much score the same percentage for all these 3 categories. They probably do not have kinky hair. And for nose shape, they score intermediate between Greek and snub-shaped nose, so intermediate nose shape. Now for coloring-related variants found in the file, and for blue eye haplotypes, what's interesting is they have 2 light color variants for all these variations of HERC2, and in fact they have heterozygous genotype for BH3, and they have blue eye haplotype 2 as well. So they definitely have very light eye color based on this information that's present in the file. Snipper 3 would classify them as having blue eyes. I think, what is the name? I'm getting a brain freeze. The Ysec, yeah, Ysec would classify them as having blue eyes as well, and probably blonde hair as well. Let's see. Yes, Ysec would also classify them as having blonde hair as well because of the gene type in SLC35A2. So they are definitely quite light in terms of their pigmentation. Let's observe. Do they have any ginger variants? They do have a ginger variant in this variation of MC1R, but it's just one variant and it is not enough to give them red hair. However, they do score. I remember they scored like 6% for red hair. Yes, they do score 6% odds for red hair, 6.9 actually. So 7% odds for red hair, which is quite high. But most likely they still do not have red hair based on the information that's in the file. All right, now let's look at the phenotype oracle. So the closest phenotypes to the sample are this, which is a very common phenotype for Ashkenazi Jews. In my opinion, it's very, very typical phenotype for Ashkenazi Jews. It looks a little bit like there's this actor who played in The Office called B.G. Novak, but he has sort of more extreme facial features. He has like very large eyes and kind of more extreme facial features than this, but it does look a little bit like B.G. Novak. So this is sort of a closest phenotype to this sample. Second closest phenotype also looks the same, but it's got curly hair. And the third closest phenotype is this, which I think this is the quite different from what we see in the first two. So this is probably not what the sample looks like, because to be honest, it's not a very Jewish phenotype. I don't imagine it's pretty possible for Jews to look like this. Maybe there are some Jews who look like this, to be honest, but I have never seen Jews who look the way that this phenotype looks, to be honest. Now for the two-way mixtures, it would be cool if somebody could do a face merging tool. I know there are face merging tools out there where you can take two faces and you can merge them together. And it's actually like a smart tool. It's not something that just does the average of two pictures, but actually looks at the location of the facial features of the endpoints of where like the lips are, where the nose are, where everything is, and it averages out those locations and actually creates a merge that's based on the facial features like that. Where I know something like that exists, right? So it would be cool if you run a merge on these two pictures together, and you created a phenotype that's a merge of these two together. But that would be pretty cool, right? So I'm not really sure. I can't envision what a mixture of these two would look like, to be honest. But seems that a mixture of these two would produce something that looks like this sample. Then it's a mixture of this plus this. So I can talk about the coloring though. So this plus this would probably produce something with intermediate coloring, because as you can see, this got like hazelish or dark green kind of color eyes and dark brown hair. This sample obviously has light blonde hair and light eye color. This picture also has very pale skin. This picture has olive skin tone. Then essentially for all of these mixtures, all 5 of these mixtures, we see the same picture. The top picture is very white, very pale, blonde and blue-eyed, and the bottom picture is kind of green eyes and darker hair and olive skin. So that's sort of what we see for all of these pictures. But I do need to notice that on the first 3 closest mixtures for the phenotypes, we see a mixture of a phenotype that is rather sharp looking with a phenotype that is Mediterranean, right? But the last 2 on the right, the phenotype is potato, right? It's potato. It's very round facial features, kind of fat, kind of overweight, rounder nose, smaller eyes, thin eyebrows, sparse eyebrows, and kind of more overweight, wider face overall, kind of more protruding cheekbones. So this type of phenotype is, I would say, much less frequent among Ashkenazi Jews and populations of the Mediterranean in general. So it is very interesting that this phenotype mixture is further from the sample than this mixture, because I would say that both the Baltid phenotype over here and the Nordid phenotype over here are quite uncommon for Jews, but it is much easier for me to envision a Nordid Jew than it is for me to envision a balted Jew. I would say, to be honest, it's much easier for me to envision a Jew with Nordic facial features than a Jew with balted facial features, because a Jew with a nose like this and wide face and big cheekbones and small eyes like that is very difficult for me to imagine whatsoever. So it's very telling that the first three mixtures, the closest mixtures, because if you look at the distance, these are the three closest mixtures to this sample in terms of the phenotype, um, and these are further. So the closest mixtures are all relatively realistic for what a Jew might look like. And these two, they're also realistic because you have to keep in mind that the Mediterranean does play an impact in the phenotype as well, because it's half this as well. But the Balted phenotype playing a role does not sit right with me. So let's close that. Let's actually look at the ethnic calculator results for a bit as well. I am going to zoom in so you can take a look at it. This is with 343 SNPs, so you can look at this and maybe screenshot, or maybe you can pause. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I don't really find it too interesting. It is interesting that this sample is closest to Natufians here. It is definitely very, very interesting. It seems that my trait predictor is thinking that the sample is a mixture of Egyptian pre-Ptolemaic mummy with Большой Оленей остров, which is very. This is like. It's scuffed. It is scuffed. It is not very accurate. But this is as good as it gets with 343 SNPs when all the other reference samples are also done. The thing is, you have to realize that in order for a calculator to be good, you need to have a good amount of SNPs in the calculator database, and the calculator has to be made good. And here it is from the beginning. It's got like in the whole calculator data sheet, there is like 700 SNPs to begin with, and no matter how high quality your file is, the highest you can get is like 600. So all of these coordinates for all of these samples, Natufian, BMAC, they can be good, but they can be good, but they can only be good if they're made up of a lot of individual samples. If there's like 6 different samples that make up the coordinate, they can be relatively good. But for some of them, like Natufian, this individual sample, it's just one individual sample. It cannot be that good. It can be good by accident, but it can also be very, very bad. So that's why if you try to build a PCA on the basis of my trait predictor ethnicity calculator, it looks really ridiculous. I've tried to build a PCA on the basis of my ethnicity calculator. It looks really, really ridiculous. But it does its job at predicting ethnicity. It's okay. It's not horrible, but you have to keep in mind that not only does it have to be good at telling at giving the coordinates for the sample that it analyzes, but you also have to consider the quality of the reference groups. And the quality of the reference groups is what I've been talking about for the past couple of seconds. Is that the quality of the reference groups is also quite bad. So when you combine the bad quality of the result plus the bad quality of the reference groups, you end up seeing Egyptian pre-Ptolemaic mummy plus Большой Оленей остров in the result, which is quite ridiculous. But still, I think it's okay. I think it was quite a good experience for me coding that, and it's pretty fun. I don't want to remove this from Trait Predictor. I think removing this would be kind of like, I don't know, like, why remove it? It's a feature. It's a feature. Why should I remove it? I don't want to remove it. So there you go. This is the result with Trait Predictor ethnicity calculator. Let's look at the biomarkers results. So for the biomarkers results, he is scoring lower levels of vitamin D. He is scoring lower levels of LDL cholesterol. He is scoring lower levels of HDL cholesterol. He is scoring lower levels of glucose, which is really good. He is scoring lower levels of hemoglobin, which is really good. Actually, looks like all of it is really good, besides the slightly lower levels of vitamin D. So all of these results are really good. And slightly lower levels of blood pressure. Wow, so far really good stuff. Slightly lower levels of iron, okay, and slightly lower levels of sex hormone binding globulin. Slightly lower base pairs for telomere lengths, okay. So for that, so slightly predisposed to shorter lifespan. That is a little bit unfortunate. And slightly taller height, so predisposition to be a little bit taller, which is definitely very, very interesting. I wonder why did I for the sliding bar scale, why did I set the top to be like yellow? Isn't taller always better? I don't know. Maybe that was for women. I don't remember why I set the on the right to be yellow. Maybe that's for women. Maybe it's bad to be tall for women, but I think that should have been green on the right, because taller. Well, I think in our society taller is better most of the time. Well, whatever. Okay, let's look at the polygenic risk scores and see what this individual scores for that. We are going to disregard stuff that is close to 1 and only look at the stuff that is either very low or very high predisposition. So he's got a high predisposition to kidney stones, a low predisposition to hemoglobin E disease, a low predisposition to migraine, a low predisposition to gout, a low predisposition to eczema. He's got a low predisposition to polycystic ovary syndrome, which is really, really good, a high predisposition to cataracts, a low predisposition to age-related macular degeneration, a high predisposition to rheumatoid arthritis. He's got a high predisposition to leukemia. Wow, that's really interesting. Leukemia. Let's look that up in the file. I'm curious to see what contributed to the score. So he does not have any NQ01 alleles, alright, but he does have these two genotypes which lead to increased odds of leukemia. Alright. He's got average odds for vitiligo. He's got lower odds for myopia. Wow. So myopia, that's kind of rare. That's interesting that he's scoring like that for myopia. So he's got this genotype, GG here, which leads to significantly lower risk of myopia and greater quality of eyesight. This is the biggest contribution to the myopia risk score, and this is like a pretty rare genotype as well. So it's from what I remember, it's very Eurasian. It's a very European genotype to have. So this individual has this rare European genotype that leads to reduced risk of myopia, which is pretty cool. Definitely pretty cool. Lower odds of corneal astigmatism, lower odds of primary biliary cirrhosis, average odds of stroke, higher odds of male pattern hair loss. So that's typical for Europeans to score slightly higher for that. Only one SNP for deep vein thrombosis and slightly higher odds for cardiovascular issues. That's pretty typical. Slightly lower odds for ADHD, slightly lower odds for unipolar depression, slightly higher odds for bipolar type 1, and very high odds for schizophrenia. Okay, there is. We will look at the schizophrenia and bipolar type 1. There is the DRD2 panel, and we're going to look at the mental health results panel as well in a couple seconds. But that's very interesting. So the highest thing they scored so far is schizophrenia and bipolar type 1, and that's definitely very interesting. High score for type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes. So type 2 and type 1 diabetes are also concerns. Low score for Alzheimer's and low score for multiple sclerosis. He's got a 2 risk factors for breast cancer, low odds for prostate cancer, high odds for glioma, but we're going to look at that as well. Low odds for thyroid cancer, no risk factors for blood cancer and JAK2, and he's got 8 risk factors for testicular cancer of 12, and he's got homozygous risk genotype in keto G. So that's typical for Europeans to have homozygous risk genotype in keto G. Most Europeans have the same genotype here. I talk about this in every video. You must already be familiar with this topic of conversation. It is very typical for Europeans to have the same risk genotype in keto G as this sample right here. Europeans are predisposed to testicular cancer. It is no surprise to anybody, but that does not mean that every European in the world has testicular cancer, or that every European develops testicular cancer at some point. No, testicular cancer is a very rare condition. Just because you have these SNPs, just because you have this genotype, does not mean you will develop testicular cancer. Most people who have this genotype never develop testicular cancer ever in their life, so it's not that big of a deal. 2 risk variance for celiac disease out of 10, so it's not that big of a... Yeah, that's whatever. It's pretty common. No risk variance for GSS, 2 risk variance 4 for Crohn's, but none of them are marked as important, and 1 risk variance for Parkinson's right here, but I've seen that pretty commonly in different samples, and we don't see any other rare conditions. We see some common risk variance for some rare conditions, but we don't see any uncommon risk variance for anything. So that's pretty good. And 4 risk variants for allergies out of 14 total, which is pretty much average. So once again, nothing too uncommon. Now let's look at the monogenic traits, and we will not be able to verify the diabetes stuff, but we will be able to look at the schizophrenia and bipolar and DRD2 panels in particular to verify what contributed to that. Now for results for mental health section, let's look at the warrior versus warrior phenotype, and here he's scoring warrior phenotype for sure. So quicker dopamine reuptake, lower dopamine levels, and higher stress resiliency. Based on genotypes in COMT, MAOA, and MAOB, this individual is scoring definitely much more of a warrior phenotype, which is kind of unusual for Europeans. Europeans typically score more warrior, but this sample seems to be scoring warrior. For DRD2, this sample is scoring higher number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain. So this is a part of the reason of why they score so high for schizophrenia and bipolar, because of the DRD2 panel, where they are predisposed to higher number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain. There is a direct correlation, direct linkage between higher number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain and D2 activity and schizophrenia and bipolar, especially bipolar 1. I don't know so much bipolar 2, but bipolar 1, in terms of their chemistry, it's very similar to schizophrenia, and the way it's treated as well. It is treated with antipsychotics and mood stabilizers. In bipolar 1, they use mood stabilizers as well, but the main treatment for bipolar 1 is antipsychotics. For bipolar 2, it's different. Bipolar 1, bipolar 2, completely different diseases. So bipolar 1 is very much about dopamine and very much about psychosis as well. Now there's also DRD1 and DRD3 and DRD4, which we might go over as well, which also contribute to the score. But let's see. I don't think we can get much information from these. So for serotonin and 5-HT, he's scoring intermediate levels of 5-HT and serotonin, which leads to intermediate odds for anxiety and depression. But we remember he was scoring lower for the odds of anxiety and depression. He does not have long form 5-HT TLPR, so he's got short form 5-HT TLPR and slightly higher odds for anxiety and depression. And for autism, he's actually scoring lower odds of autism, so he's quite protected from autism, which is definitely very, very cool to see. All right. For lactose persistence, he is scoring intermediate odds of lactose persistence. He does not carry any of the European variants for lactose persistence or the Arab variant, but here in LCT, he does have the genotype which leads to likely being lactose persistent. The C allele here is not exclusive to Europeans, but it is a common worldwide SNP that correlates to being lactose persistent, and he does carry 2 variants for likely being lactose persistent here. So because of that, he is still scoring intermediate odds for lactose intolerance, despite not having the European or the Arab variants for lactose persistence. He does carry the sort of the non-European or the non-Arab, the worldwide variants for that. He does have the variants for being lactose persistent nonetheless in this variation of LCT. By the way, LCT and MCM6, they're located right next to each other. They're basically like one gene echo complex that are right next to each other, kind of like the HLA genes. HLA genes, they're technically different genes, HLA-A, HLA-B, HLA-C, but they're all within one big complex of genes that are located next to each other. That's the same case with LCT and MCM6. He's got predisposition to higher level of empathy based on genotypes in OXTR, these 3 genotypes right here. And for diabetes, well, let's see. He's got this genotype right here, which leads to 5.2 times the risk of type 1 diabetes. I believe this must be HLA. This has to be HLA. Let's look it up. If it's on the 6th chromosome, it's HLA. No, it's not HLA. It is not HLA. Okay. Slight increase in the risk of type 1 diabetes. Okay. Normal. 7-fold decrease in risk of type 1 diabetes. Alright, so this is an HLA, which we know for sure because I coded it. So HLA gene panel is probably going to look pretty good. Alright. Hemochromatosis, he is not a carrier of C282Y hemochromatosis mutation, so he does not have hemochromatosis, and for multiple sclerosis does not carry risk variants in HLA. Cardiovascular disease panel, he's got predisposition to intermediate or higher odds of cardiovascular issues. So the homocysteine panel is probably looking pretty average or good. Excuse me, it cut off. So the homocysteine panel is probably looking pretty average or good because we saw the cardiovascular panel on the polygenic risk score page, and there was slightly above average for the risk score. So considering that here he's scoring high rates of cardiovascular issues, I'm expecting the polygenic score for the homocysteine panel to be slightly below average or slightly or just basically average in the risk. I do not expect it to be above average in the risk at all, but we will find out. And looks like he's got a genotype in this version of EDAR, which is European genotype in EDAR, higher protruding nasal bridge, smaller nose size, and thicker eyebrows. He does have one HLA variant, HLA risk variant for vitiligo here. That is actually in DRB1, and he does not have any HLA risk variant in HLA-A for vitiligo. Pretty good. Does not have micropenis. He's got impaired muscle performance, likely endurance athlete rather than strength or power athlete. Okay. Let's see what else. Does not have any risk variants for familiar Mediterranean fever. Now, for the MTHFR panel, we see this is a good genotype in this variation of MTHFR, which is to good homocysteine levels. That's pretty good. But he does have this genotype, which is to possibly impaired folate metabolism. But overall, because of this genotype, because of the impact of this RS181133 genotype, I think this will negate the impact of this genotype in this variation of MTHFR, because they both have roughly equal impact, but the impact of this genotype being so good, the good GG genotype in this variation, will overshadow the impact of the negative impact of heterozygous genotype in this variation of MTHFR. I believe that overall, the result that we will see on the homocysteine panel will be good. I am thinking that it will be good. I haven't seen it before. This is my first time reaction. We will get to it once we get to it, but I think it will be good. For the cancers panel, he is scoring lower odds of epithelial cancer, so he's quite protected from cancer. I was wondering why he scored so high for glioma, but it looks like it has nothing to do with epithelial cancers. In fact, he's not scoring for any variants that have to do with 8q24. And in fact, for glioma, none of his genotypes for glioma are in 8q24 at all. So this is EGFR, and then it's this genotype and it's this genotype. So none of these are in 8q24. His 8q24 genotypes are pretty much all good except for this one. So the glioma genotype, the glioma risk, polygenic risk score, had nothing to do with 8q24. For prostate cancer, he's got really good genotype. For breast cancer, he's got 2 risk variants here. For testicular cancer, of course, we already looked at that, but that's typical for Europeans to have increased risk for that. Very typical. For other cancers, we see risk variants for lymphoma. He doesn't have any risk variants for that, based on the TNF gene. And for thyroid cancer, he's got lower odds of that as well, which is really cool. For the rare diseases and traits panel, he's got increased risk of ankylosing spondylitis, and he's not a carrier of something lupus syndrome risk. We don't really see any other things besides the 2 risk variants for leprosy. We don't see anything else here, so we can move on. He does not have any HLA risk variants for celiac disease, which is pretty cool. And he's got 2 protective variants from HIV and HLA-C, which is really good. So I'm expecting the HLA gene panel to be pretty good. HLA gene panel is indeed pretty good, so he's scoring 44.5% for lower odds of autoimmune disease. We can check HLA genotypes right here. And it looks like for the HLA genotypes, he's got in HLA-A really good stuff, except for this genotype, which leads to slightly higher odds of multiple sclerosis, but it does not have a very high effect. HLA-B, he's got really good stuff as well. So all these are really good genotypes. HLA-C, he does have a bad genotype here and a bad genotype here, but he does have a good genotype here as well, which leads to lower odds of HIV viral load. So overall, I guess there's bad and there's the good genotypes, but still, overall he's scoring lower odds of autoimmune disease. So overall, I guess he's doing pretty good. And finally, we are getting to the homocysteine panel. I was predicting it to be good, and I was sort of right. He's scoring intermediate homocysteine levels. Just by the way, for context, lower is better for homocysteine levels. You want to have lower homocysteine levels. So he's scoring intermediate homocysteine levels. So I was sort of right in expecting them to be good. And by the way, my intuition was that because of the MTHFR genotypes, he would have lower homocysteine levels. And in fact, my intuition was entirely correct, because look at the CBS panel genotypes. He's got slightly increased homocysteine levels here. He's got higher levels of plasma homocysteine here. He's got higher levels of plasma homocysteine here. So all these three genotypes that he's got in the CBS panel lead to elevated homocysteine levels. So if we remove these three genotypes from the file, he would be scoring even lower for levels of homocysteine. And if we remove the risk variance for homocystinuria from the file, he would be scoring even lower for homocysteine levels. So the fact that I was able to guess that he would be scoring lower for homocysteine levels from the MTHFR genotypes, I think it's really impressive. So it definitely shows that I understand my app really well. But I don't know, maybe I'm giving myself too much credit. You tell me in the comments. But anyway, he is scoring intermediate homocysteine levels with my tool, which is pretty good. And overall, when you combine these scores together, that adds up to, let's go to Polygenic risk score page again, and let's look up. Wait. Let's look up. Let me show you what that adds up to. Cardiovascular issues panel, where he scores slightly above average for average also cardiovascular issues. He's got basically 12% increased odds of various cardiovascular issues, such as damage to blood vessel walls, blood clots, impaired blood flow, heart disease, peripheral artery stroke, or disease or stroke. So because of these panels, the homocysteine panel and the cardiovascular panel, he's got slightly increased odds for these conditions. That's essentially what it's about. Now for the muscular dystrophy myopathies, he's got no risk variance for that, no risk variance for ADL either. For colorblindness panel, he's got one risk variance for colorblindness in OPN1SW, and he's got no risk variance in OPN1MW. He's got a predisposition to lower odds of obesity in FTO gene. Well, it's not just FTO, it's also PFKP, it's also these other variants, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 SNPs. Based on these 5 SNPs, he's got lower odds of obesity. Based on 1 SNP for syncope, he's got slightly above average odds for syncope. And for biotraits panel, he's got 2 copies of the hunter-gatherer CLTCL1 gene variant, which leads to reduced ability to process carbs and sugars, which is definitely very, very interesting. Now, finally, for the blood group panel, he's got blood type. Wow, it is actually very difficult to determine what blood type he has. Let's zoom in. So usually my trait predictor gives a very cut and concise blood type prediction, like 96% type O, or like 85% type A, or like 95% type B. But in this case, it's like sort of 36% type O, 25% type A, 37%. So the only thing we can say about the blood type in this case, because it's so difficult to classify, is that it is not type AB. Let's look at the gene type. So here's the gene type that is likely type A or O. Here's the gene type that's possibly type A or O. Here's the gene type that's likely blood type AB, likely not blood type AB, likely blood type O, not blood type O, high odds for B and O. It is so difficult to tell. Based on my experience, I would say I would go with the blood type B prediction, because this is the highest percentage that my trait predictor gives. So most likely I would say the sample has blood type B, since this is the highest percentage. This is most likely what this sample has, because the way I built it, it's pretty smart. But we don't know for sure. So maybe leave your thoughts in the comments what you think the blood type of this Ashkenazi Jewish sample from Erfurt 12th century is. I would be very interested to read your comments and read your thoughts in the comments. But anyway, thanks for watching my video until the very end. Make sure you check out the description of the video and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed my comment. If you enjoyed my content, thanks for watching. Goodbye.